Even if we flew several hundred sorties, even 1,000 sorties, we have days to go before we have decisively defeated or incapacitated just the air and missile component in the weapons of mass destruction and command centers in Iraq and Kuwait.
So I apologize.
We have not even begun the land battle, which, if we have to fight it, is the one which poses the most serious risks for American and coalition forces.
I actually wanted to stop you short of the land battle there and sort of stay on the air battle for a second, because if we were sitting here 3 or 4 nights from now and the U.S. Air Force was still trying to pound missile sites and air bases and chemical and industrial complexes throughout Iraq, you wouldn't be surprised?
I wouldn't be surprised. I think we can accomplish the key phases of the air battle much more quickly. But after all, we have no reason to risk our ground forces when we can attack Iraq's ground forces and its air forces and other facilities virtually at will from the air. The best way to minimize our casualties is to take advantage of our overwhelming superiority in the air, a superiority that Saddam Hussein simply cannot reply to.
General Bernard Traynor in Boston, our other resident military analyst for the duration. At the same time, is it also not true that the Iraqi military, the Iraqi army in the field, particularly in Kuwait, can simply keep its head down and endure much of this bombing for the next several days?
Oh, I'm sure they can, Peter. We've seen the opening phase of the air campaign, and these first raids are designed to cripple his ability to take offensive action, taking out his Air Force, taking out his missiles, taking out as many of his air defenses as we can. This is the preparation to allow our aircraft to fly freely over Kuwait and over Iraq to deliver the ordnance on the Iraqi forces that are defending in Kuwait and southern Iraq, and against his military and his political infrastructure inside of Iraq. So these first attacks are not designed to break the Iraqi army. It's designed to allow us to achieve air superiority and to neutralize his ability to launch his missiles and any other type of offensive action against the coalition forces and the Saudi Arabia and Israel.
Bernard Traynor and Tony Cordesman, thank you very much for the moment. Please, neither of you go away. It is 5 minutes before 9 Eastern Time. It is first light in Baghdad now. It's just 5 minutes before 5 in the morning there. And clearly many people in that capital city of 4 million people will be waking up to what so many of them in the last couple of days have made clear to Western reporters they knew were coming. In the words of one, I think it was the Wall Street Journal reporter Geraldine Brooks, who just got out of there yesterday, said there is this sort of public hope, but this private desperation, as many Iraqis try to leave the capital of Baghdad and go to at least a couple of the Iraqi holy cities, where, in the words of one Iraqi, speaking quite cynically about it, even President Bush would not bomb. There is no evidence that has occurred, but the U.S. military and the President have always made clear that if Saddam Hussein took refuge anywhere, he is a legitimate target, and if he went to a holy city, one assumes he would continue to be a target. But we will try, if we can, in fact, we try constantly to reestablish contact with Baghdad, a city that has clearly, without knowing only as little as we do, has been badly shaken by something so many Iraqis simply knew was coming. We are joined tonight by a man who comments regularly on political military affairs for us. The former chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Admiral William Crowe, was in Oklahoma City this evening. Good evening, sir. Welcome. I'd just like to know what you've been thinking over the last hour or so.
Well, it's upon us. Certainly from my standpoint, which is not well informed, it's very encouraging thus far. And I certainly concur with everything I've heard Tony and Mick Traynor comment on. I would urge you to not expect too much information too quickly, and to bear the old maxim, which is quite common in the military, that first reports are not always accurate, but certainly it has gone well and started the way we intended it. And I think we can be encouraged, but we should expect a lot of this over the next few days.
Well, those of us who have been talking for the last hour or so are reasonably thick-skinned, sir. Have we, in your view, made any glaring mistakes in assessing the situation up until now?
Not at all. As a bystander, I'm very impressed, Peter.
Well, I wasn't fishing for that. I just wanted you to enlarge a little bit on what you see or what you think as you've looked at the maps of the Middle East, how you think the campaign may have begun, or you look at the map of Iraq. If you'd like to just sort of indulge in a stream of consciousness for the next few minutes, we'll try to illustrate it for you.
Well, we're talking about things that we've gathered in our past knowledge and so forth, but tonight's the real thing, and we're dealing with a minimum amount of information. A lot of confusion, I'm sure, on both sides. I think that Mick Traynor was correct that maybe we saw the first stealth attacks. On the other hand, I think we also saw the initial confusion that goes with absorbing the very first air attack. I'm sure Iraq was not as organized as perhaps they wanted to be or expected to be. I suspect that we have not done everything precisely the way we wanted to do it. I would be surprised if it was flawless. On the other hand, no military operation is flawless.
Yes, you said it was at lunch here some days ago that the moment the war begins, every military plan goes out the window. Is that really true?
That's a little different sense that we were talking about. We were talking about plans of years and months and so forth. This plan has been of the last few days. It's been specific. It had in mind the exact targets they were talking about. I don't think it's generally applicable in this case. It will be now from after we've hit the original targets and we get our damage assessment and we see that some things didn't go the way we wanted, some went better, we will be refining and altering those plans hourly, day by day, and missions and packages will be changed from the original planning.
You were, sir, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs through the development of some of the technology that's being used tonight. What, slightly a negative question, I grant you, but what makes you nervous about the use of American technology in a situation like this, aside from the obvious that it doesn't work?
Well, you always want to know whether it'll work in the real world. And from a professional standpoint, we're going to see some really interesting systems used for the first time in anger, and we will be extremely curious as to they perform as advertised. What you're really looking for, of course, is some of the countermeasures that are taken by an enemy. You find sometimes in sophisticated weapon systems that some very primitive defenses prove effective. We'll look to see if the Iraqis have developed any of those.
Now, you, sir, have commanded men in combat. Tell me, in the minute we have left before President Bush comes and speaks to the nation, what you think the state of mind and emotion might be of American fighter pilots over Iraq and Kuwait tonight.
Well, their adrenaline is flowing. They're a very confident group. They're extremely trained, and they're at a high edge right now. I think their morale is, while it may have slumped over the last few months as they were going through the training stage, as we have built up to the 15 January deadline, I think it's come right back up. Every indication I have is that they are at the very peak. And this was a very good argument for not waiting any longer, is to take advantage of this attitude. And in some of the footage I've seen on television, talking to those people, I think it's confirmed just by their manner, their enthusiasm, and their determination.
Thank you very much, Admiral Crowe. We hope you'll stay with us. Forgive me for interrupting. Here's President Bush.
5. Just 2 hours ago, Allied air forces began an attack on military targets in Iraq and Kuwait. These attacks continue as I speak. Ground forces are not engaged. This conflict started August 2nd when the dictator of Iraq invaded a small and helpless neighbor. Kuwait, a member of the Arab League and a member of the United Nations, was crushed. Its people brutalized. 5 months ago, Saddam Hussein started this cruel war against Kuwait. Tonight, the battle has been joined. This military action, taken in accord with United Nations resolutions and with the consent of the United States Congress, follows months of constant and virtually endless diplomatic activity on the part of the United Nations, the United States, and many, many other countries. Arab leaders sought what became known as an Arab solution, only to conclude that Saddam Hussein was unwilling to leave Kuwait. Others traveled to Baghdad in a variety of efforts to restore peace and justice. Our Secretary of State, James Baker, held an historic meeting in Geneva, only to be totally rebuffed. This past weekend, in a last-ditch effort, the Secretary General of the United Nations went to the Middle East with peace in his heart. his second such mission, and he came back from Baghdad with no progress at all in getting Saddam Hussein to withdraw from Kuwait. Now, the 28 countries with forces in the Gulf area have exhausted all reasonable efforts to reach a peaceful resolution, have no choice but to drive Saddam from Kuwait by force. We will not fail. As I report to you, air attacks are underway against military targets in Iraq. We are determined to knock out Saddam Hussein's nuclear bomb potential. We will also destroy his chemical weapons facilities. Much of Saddam's artillery and tanks will be destroyed. Our operations are designed to best protect the lives of all the coalition forces by targeting Saddam's vast military arsenal. Initial reports from General Schwarzkopf are that our operations are proceeding according to plan. Our objectives are clear. Saddam Hussein's forces will leave Kuwait. The legitimate government of Kuwait will be restored to its rightful place, and Kuwait will once again be free. Iraq will eventually comply with all relevant United Nations resolutions, and then, when peace is restored, it is our hope that Iraq will live as a peaceful and cooperative member of the family of nations, thus enhancing the security and stability of the Gulf. Some may ask, why act now? Why not wait? The answer is clear. The world could wait no longer. Sanctions, though having some effect, showed no signs of accomplishing their objective. Sanctions were tried for well over 5 months, and we and our allies concluded that sanctions alone would not force Saddam from Kuwait. While the world waited, Saddam Hussein systematically raped, pillaged, and plundered a tiny nation, no threat to his own. He subjected the people of Kuwait to unspeakable atrocities, and among those maimed and murdered, innocent children. While the world waited, Saddam sought to add to the chemical weapons arsenal he now possesses an infinitely more dangerous weapon of mass destruction, a nuclear weapon. And while the world waited, while the world talked peace and withdrawal, Saddam Hussein dug in and moved massive forces into Kuwait. While the world waited, while Saddam stalled, more damage was being done to the fragile economies of the Third World, the emerging democracies of Eastern Europe, to the entire world, including to our own economy. The United States, together with the United Nations, exhausted every means at our disposal to bring this crisis to a peaceful end. However, Saddam clearly felt that by stalling and threatening and defying the United Nations, he could weaken the forces arrayed against him. While the world waited, Saddam Hussein met every overture of peace with open contempt. While the world prayed for peace, Saddam prepared for war. I had hoped that when the United States Congress, in historic debate, took its resolute action, Saddam would realize he could not prevail and would move out of Kuwait in accord with the United Nations resolutions. He did not do that. Instead, he remained intransigent, certain that time was on his side. Saddam was warned over and over again to comply with the will of the United Nations, leave Kuwait or be driven out. Saddam has arrogantly rejected all warnings. Instead, he tried to make this a dispute between Iraq and the United States of America. Well, he failed. Tonight, 28 nations, countries from 5 continents, Europe and Asia, Africa and the Arab League, have forces in the Gulf area standing shoulder to shoulder against Saddam Hussein. These countries had hoped the use of force could be avoided. Regrettably, we now believe that only force will make him leave. prior to ordering our forces into battle, I instructed our military commanders to take every necessary step to prevail as quickly as possible and with the greatest degree of protection possible for American and Allied servicemen and women. I've told the American people before that this will not be another Vietnam. And I repeat this here tonight. Our troops will have the best possible support in the entire world, and they will not be asked to fight with one hand tied behind their back. I'm hopeful that this fighting will not go on for long, and that casualties will be held to an absolute minimum. This is an historic moment. We have in this past year made great progress in ending the long era of conflict and Cold War. We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders. We have no argument with the people of Iraq. Indeed, for the innocents caught in this conflict, I pray for their safety. Our goal is not the conquest of Iraq. It is the liberation of Kuwait. It is my hope that somehow the Iraqi people can, even now, convince their dictator that he must lay down his arms, leave Kuwait, and let Iraq itself rejoin the family of peace-loving nations. Thomas Paine wrote many years ago, "These are the times that try men's souls." Those well-known words are so very true today. But even as planes of the multinational forces attack Iraq, I prefer to think of peace, not war. I am convinced not only that we will prevail, but that out of the horror of combat will come the recognition that no nation can stand against a world united. No nation will be permitted to brutally assault its neighbor. No president can easily commit our sons and daughters to war. They are the nation's finest. Ours is an all-volunteer force, magnificently trained, highly motivated. The troops know why they're there, and listen to what they say, for they've said it better than any president or prime minister ever could. Listen to Hollywood Huddleston, Marine Lance Corporal. He says, "Let's free these people so we can go home and be free again." And he's right. The terrible crimes and tortures committed by Saddam's henchmen against the innocent people of Kuwait are an affront to mankind and a challenge to the freedom of all. Listen to one of our great officers out there, Marine Lieutenant General Walter Boomer. He said, "There are things worth fighting for. A world in which brutality and lawlessness are allowed to go unchecked isn't the kind of world we're going to want to live in." Listen to Master Sergeant J.P. Kendall of the 82nd Airborne. "We're here for more than just the price of a gallon of gas. What we're doing is going to chart the future of the world for the next 100 years. It's better to deal with this guy now than 5 years from now." And finally, we should all sit up and listen to Jackie Jones, an Army lieutenant, when she says, "If we let him get away with this, who knows what's going to be next?" I've called upon Hollywood and Walter and J.P. and Jackie and all their courageous comrades in arms to do what must be done. Tonight, America and the world are deeply, deeply grateful to them and to their families. And let me say to everyone listening or watching tonight, when the troops we've sent in finish their work, I'm determined to bring them home as soon as possible. Tonight, as our forces fight, they and their families are in our prayers. May God bless each and every one of them and the coalition forces at our side in the Gulf, and may He continue to bless our nation, the United States of America.
The President speaking to the nation from the Oval Office this evening on the night on which he launched Operation Desert Storm to liberate Kuwait, and if possible, surely in his mind and in the minds of a great many people outside the Middle East and many inside, bring down President Saddam Hussein or cripple him in such a fashion that he never again poses a military threat to the region in any way, shape, or form, none of which at this early stage is necessarily guaranteed. This is not the time necessarily to be picking the President's speech apart, but all over America, people will in time come to question the phrase bringing American troops home as soon as possible, whether or not this is redefining the world for 100 years. The President chose to quote one young soldier on that thing. But one thing is certain, this war is going to define George Bush's presidency. I think almost everybody in the United States who's paid close attention to his presidency has agreed on that. So for our first observation to the White House and Brit Hume. Brit?
Peter, this is something that you and I have talked about. You know, this president has been criticized as a candidate and indeed as an office holder for lacking vision. Well, it struck me as I listened to that speech that if he has a vision, a long view of the world, he did articulate it tonight. Whether it was convincing to the people who heard it in the crucible of this moment, of course, is impossible to say. But as one who has heard virtually every word that he has spoken on this issue from August 2nd forward, it struck me that he did save his most organized and most persuasive case for the night when he needed it most.
Britt, the President says, why act now? Which, of course, is a question that a great many Americans around the country have been asking, as they have very vigorously protested the President's decision to go to war this soon. Are they sitting down in front of you now?
No, I'm fine, Peter. Go ahead.
Okay,
I'm sorry.
Just want to tell that young man next to you that you're on the air. If you do, go ahead while we wait for a second. The point is that there are many people around the country who have taken quite vigorous and public objection to the President's decision to go to war rather than to let the sanctions work over a lengthy period of time. It was early in November, Britt, when the country, or the President, put the country on an offensive posture rather than just a defensive one. And he says again tonight that in his view sanctions were never going to work. He firmly convinced of that.
Well, he's certainly firmly convinced of that. And Peter, it's worth noting that I have been told by senior advisors to the President that all along the Arab experts, the Arab specialists in the State Department and in the intelligence community have advised the President and those immediately around him that sanctions would not work against Saddam Hussein, that he would let his own people starve down to the last bone before he deprived his military, and that he would do everything he could to hold on to Kuwait, that the sanctions would not work. And as recently as last week at a meeting here at the White House, a number of those specialists, including April Glaspie, who still has the title of the United States Ambassador to Iraq, advised the President that they did not believe at this point that Saddam Hussein was going to yield to the threat of military force either, that it just wasn't going to work. Nonetheless, the President and his men and those around him all held out hope that at the last minute it would, but were deeply pessimistic starting recently that it ever would.
Or you bring up a name from the past, a woman named April Glaspie, American ambassador to Iraq, seen in the famous video with Saddam Hussein telling him that the United States had no particular policy about Kuwait. She was under instructions at the time from the State Department to say just that. And before Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, an encounter between an American diplomat based on American policy towards the Middle East, which will go into the history books and be debated for years to come. But a great many American politicians tonight will think this is not a time in fact, a great many Americans tonight will think this is not a time to debate the president's policies, because American military men and women are now involved in a war. Let's go to Capitol Hill, where ABC's Jim Wooten is standing by with Senator John Warner.
Warner is the ranking Republican on the Armed Services Committee, former Secretary of the Navy, and he's also a member of the Intelligence Committee. I assume you believe that the President did make his case tonight.
Very definitely, but I'm pleased that the constitutional process as laid down by the Founding Fathers was complied with before this military action. I'm also pleased that the President did not pull the trigger the instant the UN deadline went into effect, but gave Saddam Hussein in diplomacy another 48 hours.
Is there anything that Congress can do now? Is there any further role that Congress plays, that a man like you?
Well, very definitely. I've been summoned to go to the Secretary of Defense's office early in the morning to begin to lay plans on that. But I'd like to point out one other thing. The President tonight, and in meetings with congressional leaders where I was in attendance, repeatedly said that he wanted to give his military commanders a greater degree of discretion in this conflict than perhaps at any time since World War II. He felt all along that they didn't want any parallels to Vietnam, but this time he picked the best. He's given them the authority. He'll remain civilian control, in control, undoubtedly, with Secretary Cheney, but they will have, as he said tonight, their arm will not be tied behind their back, and they will be given a greater degree of discretion.
Peter?
I was just going to ask Senator Warner a little bit more about that, Jim. Yeah. Presidents do meddle in military affairs no end. One is reminded of Lyndon Johnson during Vietnam particularly. Senator Warner, is there no circumstance in which you believe the President will be tempted to play a more active role than he has up until now in military affairs?
Well, I was in the Pentagon for 5 years during Vietnam as Undersecretary, Secretary of the Navy, and saw firsthand how the military was put on a pretty tight rein. This time, as the President consulted with the leaders in Congress, and bear in mind he did that more than any other president in history before a conflict, repeatedly said he did not want those same parallels. And tonight he made reference to not having their arms tied, one arm behind their back. And to me, that means he'll maintain civilian control, and dearly, with his Secretary of Defense, observed keenly and carefully all of the operations. But I do say that he will give them a greater degree of discretion than senior military people have had probably since World War II.
Senator Warner, you've been very visible throughout the run-up to actual war, throughout the crisis. You've been a very strong supporter of the President. What advice have you been giving him?
Well, he followed it. I was one of the ones in December that called for early action by Congress, believing that the Constitution must be met, and indeed he did that. And secondly, again, to launch this attack, and I said this at our meeting on Monday, time it in connection with the best advice that you can get from the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Commander-in-Chief, the SINC, General Schwarzkopf, and I'm confident he did that.
And what's the biggest pitfall we have to watch for at the moment?
Early optimism, and bear in mind we must maintain in our hearts the concern for the men and women engaged in that battle at all levels, and also their families here at home.
Thank you, Senator Warner. If I may, I'd like to talk to Jim Wooten for just one more minute. Jim, it's just my instinct that at a moment of great national testing like this, politicians would want to converge on Capitol Hill, if only to talk to one another. Is that happening?
It isn't happening, Peter, not at all. I think this happened so late tonight, and not all congressmen, as Senator Warner was, were briefed early on as to the possibility of what was happening tonight. And the Senate went out of session a little earlier, so did the House. So most of them made their way home, and I expect got the news about the same time that we did.
We're always asking you to count noses up there, particularly in the Senate, as to way emotion intellects are running. What do you think this will have caused tonight? Great surprise that it was this soon?
No, not at all. No surprise at all that I could discover in the few senators that I've talked with. I think that there was some anticipation that it might be even a little longer than this, but I don't think that, that the trigger being pulled on this night surprised anybody in the Congress.
Okay, Jim Wooten, thank you very much, and also thank you, Senator Warner, for coming in, and certainly in that closing remark, reflecting the feeling of all Americans, perhaps not all Americans, but let's assume all Americans, no matter which side of the political issue they are at the moment, that their hearts go out this evening to the families, wives and children, mothers and fathers of men and women who are serving in the Persian Gulf, whose situation at the moment we simply know very little about. But Bob Zelnick, if you're at the Defense Department, and I hope you are, we have been told that the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Colin Powell, and the Secretary of Defense are going to brief the nation on some aspect of the military campaign. Do we know when?
Yes, we're told it'll be in just a couple of minutes from now, and that we'll get a hard warning time of 2 minutes before they come in. There are some very interesting things to be gone over by these two gentlemen. Number one, we're getting indications of just how massive this attack was. According to Navy sources, it began with the launching of about 100 cruise missiles at Iraqi targets. That's about a fifth of all the cruise missiles the U.S. had aboard naval vessels in the area. Second, I was struck by the President's reference to the fact that the early targets included tanks and artillery, as well as the chemical weapons and potential nuclear capability.
Can I stop you there for a second?
Sure.
You confirm, now the President did said, we will destroy his tanks, we will destroy his artillery. So you're confirming they were targets this evening?
That was our interpretation.
Okay.
I believe that we will get more on that from General Powell and Secretary Cheney.
Okay.
I may have not heard it the same way you did.
Well, I
Peter.
apologize. I didn't mean to bring you up short there, but you're quite right that if it was tanks and artillery that the U.S. Air Force or cruise missiles were after at the moment, this is certainly widening the battle beyond where people expected it would go in the first stages.
Right, and the other thing that struck me militarily about the President's remarks was that the military objectives remain restrained, controlled, and pointed at the UN resolutions, the withdrawal of Iraq from Kuwait. Again, no big effort to get to the Iraqi government or force changes in Baghdad.
Okay, Bob Zelnick at the Pentagon, please tell us as soon as Secretary Cheney and General Powell come along. A couple of other reports, but they are very sketchy. The British Broadcasting Corporation, which has very good sources in the Middle East, and in fact is, along with the Voice of America, one of the two sources of news to which Iraqis and everybody else in the Middle East who has access to shortwave radio will be clinging tonight, is reporting that 5 Iraqi Scud missiles, about which we've been talking for some time, have been launched at Saudi Arabia. And the French embassy in Riyadh, which is the Saudi winter capital, where ABC's Barry Dunsmore has reporting tonight, confirms that at least 1 Scud missile was fired. Now, we've had these reports of a Scud being fired some time ago. You heard ABC's Bill Redeker, who's in eastern Saudi Arabia, refer to a Scud, and we've been talking about the Soviet Scud and the Iraqi refined Scud and all about their ranges. And while we have on at least 3 occasions now heard about them being fired, we have yet to hear anything about any of them landing. In terms of early damage, we can go back to Jerusalem now, where ABC's Dean Reynolds has been monitoring Israeli intelligence as to whether or not, I think we need to look at a map at this point, as to whether or not 2 key Iraqi missile sites on the western border, where Iraq and Syria join, have been destroyed. They were the ones that the Israelis are most concerned about. So, Dean, if you can talk about them, we'll go to our wall map here in the studio and try to match up with what you're talking about.
Well, Peter, if you go to the map, you can see where the nation of Jordan juts out in sort of a panhandle effect toward Iraq, and just a few kilometers beyond the Jordanian border lie H-2 and H-3, the missile sites with the modified Scud missiles that were threatening or menacing the Israelis. The Israeli military reports that those missile sites were hit in the assault by the American Air Force, that they may have been severely damaged, perhaps even totally destroyed. We are entering a period of uncertainty, however, in Israel, which accounts for the announcement to prepare your gas masks here, because in about 40 minutes from now, this is how long it would have taken from the initial assault, 40 minutes from now, for the Iraqis to have armed and readied a missile. So that if one of the launchers, one of the missiles perhaps was not hit, the Iraqis may yet have the wherewithal to fire one of these missiles at the Israelis. That's why the Israelis are exercising an abundance of caution. Those missiles take between 4 and 7 minutes to fly across Jordan and target in on what Saddam Hussein says is the #1 target, which is Tel Aviv.
Which is the major Israeli city on the Mediterranean coast, which was earlier today, Dean, as I recall you telling me somewhat earlier today, was just a little more barren than usual.
That's right. The cafes were virtually empty. Children had the day off from school. It was a quiet, anxious period. The beaches were empty. The Israelis were watching and waiting, and there was every indication that something was imminent. Prime Minister Shamir addressed the nation tonight. He doesn't do that very often. He told the Israeli people to be calm, and he urged them to cooperate with military instructions, and there was a sense that something was about to happen.
Okay, Dean Reynolds in Jerusalem, thank you very much. We will come back to you. It is 4:30 in the morning in Jerusalem. It is a little before 5:30 in the morning in Baghdad, so first light has already come to the Iraqi capital. To continue for just a few minutes now, while we're waiting for the Secretary of Defense and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs to brief us on the military situation, think a little more about the President's speech. One of our political commentators who pays particular attention to the history of the presidency is ABC's Jeff Greenfield. Jeff, your thoughts on the President's speech?
Well, I was trying to remember the last time that a president spoke under such somber circumstances, and I guess it would be October of 1962 during the Cuban Missile Crisis. The President was at pains, I think, to be optimistic, to be reassuring. That's what a president has to do under these circumstances. And it occurred to me, Peter, as a former speechwriter, that words are not the key to this. When a president commits American lives in battle, his presidency almost always stands or falls on the success of that operation. When it falters, as in Korea or Vietnam, where people think it falters, presidents don't do well. When it works, as with FDR and Truman in World War II, the public says, fine, you did your job. And so that's really what's at stake here. The words the president spoke, which I agree were, for a man who's not all that articulate, were good tonight. They're not going to decide how we feel about this. If it's quick and decisive, the president probably has sealed his fate for the better. If the war drags on, all the words that speechwriters can concoct aren't going to prevent a political firestorm. For this first night, I think he did his job, but it's going to depend on what happens in the field, not what happens on the air.
I must confess, Jeff, I can never make up my mind whether it's unseemly or not for those of us in the press to start picking apart the president on such an occasion such as this. But one of the things that he did strike me was this: oh, well, we're not going to pick it apart any longer. The Secretary of Defense has showed up at the Pentagon along with the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. That is Pete Williams, who is the normal Pentagon briefer. We will spare our audience any further political analysis of the President's speech. We'll come back to it. This is clearly a briefing that the entire nation, in fact, much of the world, will hang on the Secretary of Defense.
Well, thank you very much, Pete. Ladies and gentlemen, I know you all heard the speech a short time ago by the President. And while there is not a great deal we can add now, we did want to be as forthcoming as we can with you. At 7 o'clock tonight, as you all know by now, Eastern Time, 3 o'clock Thursday morning in the Gulf, the Armed Forces of the United States began an operation at the direction of the President to force Saddam Hussein to withdraw his troops from Kuwait and to end his occupation of that country. At the direction of the President, I signed the execute order yesterday afternoon to undertake this operation, subject to certain conditions. It was to begin only after we'd met the terms of the resolution passed last Saturday by the Congress. Those conditions have been complied with and proper notice has been given as required. And the operation was not to take place if there had been any last-minute diplomatic breakthroughs. The operation underway tonight, taking place in the pre-dawn darkness of the Persian Gulf, involves Allied air forces of 4 nations: the United States, the United Kingdom, Saudi Arabia, and Kuwait. As they undertake their missions, they do so after months of careful planning. At the direction of the President, great care has been taken to focus on military targets, to minimize U.S. casualties, and to do everything possible to avoid injury to civilians in Iraq and Kuwait. The targets being struck tonight are located throughout Iraq and Kuwait. Our focus is on the destruction of Saddam Hussein's offensive military capabilities, the very capabilities that he used to seize control of Kuwait and that make him a continuing threat to the nations of the Middle East. These are the same capabilities that now threaten American and Allied forces in the Gulf. Our goal, the same one we have maintained throughout Operation Desert Shield, is to liberate Kuwait and enforce the resolutions of the UN Security Council. This portion of the campaign, directed against Saddam Hussein's offensive military force, is an enormously complex undertaking. It involves all of the services of the United States military and hundreds of U.S. and Allied aircraft. It is an ongoing operation, and we must therefore limit the kind and the amount of information that we provide in these early stages. This obviously is different from what happened in Panama in December of 1989, where most of the operation was over by the morning of the first day. We understand your need for information about what will happen next, and we are well aware of our obligation to keep the American people informed. But you must also understand that we cannot talk about future operations without putting at risk the safety of those who will have to carry them out. I believe I can speak for all of us at the Pentagon tonight when I say that we had hoped to settle this matter peacefully. This has clearly been an agonizing decision for the President and the Congress of the United States. And we've reached the point of committing our forces to battle very reluctantly, only after the most careful consideration. But no one should doubt our ability and our resolve to carry out our mission and to achieve our objective. I have great confidence in the professionalism, the dedication, and the determination of the men and women of our armed forces. They are, without question, the finest young sailors, soldiers, airmen, and Marines this nation has ever sent in harm's way. I want to assure all Americans that we will do our very best to carry out the President's orders as quickly and efficiently as possible and at the lowest cost possible. We'd be happy to respond to a few questions.
General Powell, can you describe the Iraqi Air Force's resistance, if any, their losses so far, and to what extent do you think that you've already achieved air superiority there?
Well, the operation's only 2.5 hours old, so I'm not quite prepared to take on your second question. So far, there has been no air resistance.
Can you tell us if there's been any casualties so far?
We will, at the appropriate time, be releasing information on casualties. We're not prepared to release any specifics now. I will simply say that the preliminary reports we have received in terms of the success of the operation, and that includes the possibility of casualties, have been very, very encouraging. The operation appears to have gone very well.
What can you tell us about the Scud missiles that have been reportedly launched by Iraq?
There have been a number of reports of Scud missiles, but insofar as I am aware, they basically are false reports. General Powell may want to say
Can you give us a
something.
rundown on the types of aircrafts and numbers that were involved in the raids?
I really can't at this time because it is an ongoing operation. Let me just say that it involved the Air Forces mentioned by Secretary Cheney and sorties in the hundreds.
Were there cruise missiles involved with that?
I won't comment on specific weaponry. It's an ongoing operation.
What targets were we bombing near Baghdad, and have we bombed any facilities where we think Saddam Hussein might be?
We have not been targeting Mr. Saddam Hussein. The purpose of our bombing facilities in the area of Baghdad is essentially to go after the command and control system of the Iraqi armed forces. And we're looking at principally military targets, command and control installations, air defense sites that could put our planes at risk, but they are militarily oriented targets.
Have you heard of any Iraq response of any kind?
The response of the Iraqi forces at this point has been limited, I think would be the best way to characterize it. But again, let me emphasize, as General Powell did, we're in the very early stages of this operation. It is likely to run for a long period of time. I realize you've all got legitimate questions about it, but there simply are things we do not know yet because it is an ongoing operation, because pilots are just now returning, and there'll be a lot of work required to assess the success of the initial efforts, and there'll be a lot of follow-up work required as well.
Could you tell us, please, whether or not there have been any indications whatsoever that the Iraqi troops, the 540,000 Iraqi troops in the Kuwaiti theater, have been cut off from their command and control headquarters in Baghdad?
I wouldn't want to speculate on that at this point, Wolf.
What about, Mr. Secretary, can I follow up, please?
Sure.
Should I follow up? The President said this was strictly an air operation for the time being. When does the U.S. decide to send in the ground forces?
It is strictly an air operation for the time being, and I wouldn't want to speculate on the point at which additional forces might be engaged.
Have your targets tonight, or did any Navy
Al-Wazir Murat said on the McNeil Air News Hour this evening that we're, quote, now prisoners of our own country, in our own country. Now that we've defended ourselves from naked aggression in the Middle East, how do we defend ourselves here at home from terrorist attacks?
I'm confident that we can deal with the terrorist threat.
Have our targets thus far included tanks and artillery?
I don't want to get into specific target sets yet. As the information comes in and builds over time, and we can give it to you historically, we will give it out, but I'm not prepared to go into specific target sets and what targets have been hit and have not, because it really is just too early to give you that kind of bomb damage assessment.
If Saddam Hussein says tomorrow, I give up, I'm sorry, I will withdraw from Kuwait, will you pause to have a pause in your air campaign, or will you continue with it until you knock out all the priority targets?
I will do whatever the President of the United States directs us to do through the Secretary of Defense.
Secretary Cheney, from a military perspective, what went into your thinking in deciding to launch the attack at this point this evening? What were the factors?
Well, I think there were several factors. Of course, the President made the basic decision to commit the force. It was affected by, among other things, the expiration of the United Nations deadline that had been set on November 30th when the Security Council voted for the use of any means necessary to get him out. I think it was affected in part as a result of consultation with our allies, but it also was based upon the advice of our senior military commanders in terms of picking a time when conditions appeared to be most favorable for undertaking the operation. Let me emphasize, though, that the procedure we went through was to plan for execution of the operation at a point after the expiration of the United Nations deadline, but I had no authority to execute the plan until the President instructed me yesterday afternoon to do so, and it was at that point that we signed out the execute order with the qualifiers I mentioned in my opening statement.
Those favorable factors, can you tell us what some of those were?
I think I just leave it where it is.
Are you surprised that there was no response, or a very small response from the Iraqi forces at this point?
Again, I'm reluctant to characterize the response beyond what we've already said about it. We've not had an opportunity to debrief our pilots yet. Some of them are still flying missions, and I think it would be inappropriate at this point to convey the notion that somehow we've got a final fix on it. But I think it would be fair to say, and General Powell may well want to comment on this, that the initial reaction from the Iraqis is such that I'm generally of the opinion that we achieved a fairly high degree of tactical surprise.
Has there been Israel or Turkey on the part of Iraq?
None to my knowledge.
Mr. Secretary, could you tell us, the President mentioned that one of the objectives was to take out chemical and nuclear sites. Can you tell us in a general way if that mission was accomplished?
I can say that we have, in fact, gone after those targets. I do not yet have information on the effectiveness of those efforts.
Mr. Secretary, what about word of casualties at Baghdad? You indicated you wanted to spare civilians there. Do you have any sense about how that may or may not have occurred in the city? There was a lot of bombing, obviously, in Baghdad.
The best reporting that I've seen on what transpired in Baghdad was on CNN. And it would appear, based upon the comments that were coming in from the CNN crew in the hotel in Baghdad, that the operation was successful in striking targets with a high degree of precision. At least that's the reporting according to CNN.
Was there an Iraqi attempt? Was there an Iraqi attempt to launch missiles, sir?
Do you have any
We've
word
had
on-
reports of missile launches, but none of them have been confirmed.
What about the Scuds in western Iraq at those air bases on the border? Have you got any reading on that? Are those fairly high priority targets?
Yes, they are a fairly high priority target.
And how'd you do?
I'm not prepared to say how we did or what we've done so far.
Follow up on that. At the end of this operation, this phase of the operation, when you get a little better picture, and could you come back or have one of your staff come back and give us a briefing on
You'll be getting regular briefings, and we'll be, as the Secretary said, we're going to be as forthcoming as we possibly can,
General.
while at the same time preserving operational security.
Are you confident that your targeting of command and control sites has left Saddam Hussein the ability to, number one, know what's happening to his forces, and number two, to communicate to you that he wants to quit if he does decide so?
Again, Melissa, I don't have any information at this point on the overall effectiveness of the operation. What I said was the preliminary reports are very positive, but we are in the very earliest stages of this, and therefore there's not a lot of detailed information we can give you on what the effect of the bombing campaign has been on specific strategic categories of targets.
Is there a Navy aircraft participate?
Pardon?
Is there a military commander like Saddam Hussein still alive to surrender if there is such a decision?
I really don't have anything I can give you on that.
Did you know where
Going very
Saddam
well.
was? Did you know where Saddam was when the attacks began, and was that a target even though he was not the target?
We have not been tracking Mr. Saddam Hussein for the purpose of targeting him.
General, can you characterize in any general way how long the current beginning phase of this operation will continue? That is, the air operation will be the rest of I guess, tonight and tomorrow morning, or throughout tomorrow? Give people any kind of general idea how long this first phase will...
The air part of the campaign will continue until the whole campaign is completed. It doesn't end.
Do you believe the threat of a missile attack by the Iraqis has been eliminated at this point?
I cannot answer that at this time until we get some assessments in.
Damage to any oil facilities at all?
I don't have bomb damage assessment yet. I can't answer that question.
General, how massive is this first wave? Are we talking 500 missions, 1,000 missions tonight?
I think tomorrow we'll be in a better position to try to give you a handle on that, but this early in the operation, I'm reluctant to give those numbers out until I've had a chance to talk to General Schwarzkopf in greater detail.
General Powell, when you say hundreds of sorties,
All U.S. services were involved in this part of the campaign.
When you say, General Powell, that there were hundreds of sorties, does that mean that there were not more than 1,000?
I think I'll leave it at that, between a bread box or something else. Hundreds of sorties. Thank you all. Thank you.
Well, for those people around the country who are hungry, as I think probably the whole country is, for a measure of operational information, the Secretary of Defense and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs are being very clear. Either they won't release information now for what the Chairman calls operational security, or in some cases they simply do not know, which is, at this point in any campaign, a perfectly legitimate answer, because as they point out, pilots are still in the sky. This was an entirely air operation up until now. There have been no ground forces committed to the battle as of yet, and some of the pilots are either still up in the air or are back at their bases and have not been fully debriefed. But the President set the tone in his remarks that the U.S. Air Force, and as it is confirmed by the Secretary, the British and the French, and in some way, we're not quite sure how yet, the Saudis and the Kuwaitis are involved in the initial attack, have been going for the offensive military capability of Saddam Hussein in Kuwait, and Iraq. That, I assume, means they're going for almost everything that in any way, shape, or form could assist the war effort, but we'll talk to our military analysts in just a moment. The Kuwaiti Air Force, which fled tactical retreat, one might say, at the early hours of the Iraqi invasion back on the 2nd of August and flew out of the country, has been residing for some 5.5 months in eastern Saudi Arabia. They fly both U.S. and French aircraft. They fly the A-4, the American Skyhawk, and they also fly a French Mirage, something called an F-1. And we saw them over Thanksgiving sitting on the edge of an airbase in eastern Saudi Arabia, sitting there looking rather lonely, but with Free Kuwait on the side. They now regard themselves as the Air Force of Free Kuwait, and they have been involved in some way, so says the Secretary, in the campaign this evening. I want to bring in our two military analysts, Tony Cordesman and Bernard Trainer, who's up in Boston, to talk to us about what they hear. Let me go first to you, Tony Cordesman. And you know the language of the Pentagon so much better than we do. What do you pick up that we might be missing in terms of the characterization of how the campaign has gone so far?
Well, I think obviously there was no sign of pessimism. It's obvious that there should have been enough feedback so both the Secretary and General Powell would know if there were major problems, and I think it's very clear that they weren't, although obviously it's going to be hours and days before we'll know the detail. The key message here, however, is this is not some kind of limited initial attack. This is the start of a truly massive attack designed to root out one of the largest military establishments in the world. And just a few key statistics, Peter. We're talking about 20 main operating air bases, perhaps another 20 that have to be suppressed. We're talking about 250 missile sites, perhaps 12 command sites. We're talking about 50 to 70 surface-to-surface missile sites. We're talking, who knows how many, but in excess of 50 ammunition depots, radars, and other facilities scattered all over the country. So we're talking of thousands of sorties before we really can use air power to the point where we'll probably bring the ground power in.
And do you hear in the characterization of the mission anything that indicates to you that this is going to be a long and drawn-out affair in the air?
Well, long and drawn out, I think, in the air means that it will be long and drawn out in terms of the way we use air power to attack Iraqi targets. If they could not mount at least a surface-to-air missile defense of some note, or get a few aircraft off tonight, then it indicates that they are substantially weaker than we thought, or that they were very poorly commanded and very poorly led.
Let me go up to Boston to General Bernard Trainer to talk about some of the specifics of the briefing, which Tony Cordesman has already alluded to. General Trainer, here are the quotes from the Secretary of Defense. There's been no air resistance. Surprised?
Well, in a sense, yes. One would assume that the Iraqis might have gotten one or two aircraft up, but it certainly appeared to me that they were sending the message that Saddam Hussein's offensive air capability and his missile capability had been defanged. I've noted some of the points you just mentioned. Surprise was achieved, and of course that was a key in this operation. There was no air resistance. The operational performance and the casualties were, quote, encouraging. And there were no known Scud firing. Now, that would seem to provide a rather optimistic picture of the operation, and accepting the fact that there's always confusion, and as Admiral Crowell pointed out in the early stages of reports. It would appear, however, that the Pentagon feels that this operation went very well, with the key being that surprise was achieved. And they used not only the aircraft, but they also used the cruise missiles, which were apparently quite effective. You know, I was doing a little back-of-the-envelope figuring here, and it's rather informative. Presumably, at this point, the first sortie of the sorties of the aircraft have been completed, and they're probably in the process of turning around. Now, working this out and again, it's kind of an unclassified, back-of-the-envelope sort of estimate, excluding the cruise missiles, we're probably putting in something like 2,000 in this opening stage, probably about 2,000 sorties with the U.S. and Allied aircraft. Now, working that out in terms of the tonnage that the various types of aircraft can probably carry, we're talking with these 2,000 sorties, we're probably talking about 18,000 tons of ordnance being dropped on targets in Iraq and in Kuwait. And if that is anywhere near accurate, that is roughly the equivalent of the nuclear weapon that was dropped in Hiroshima at the end of World War II.
Well, General Traynor, keep on with your sums there. That's a very compelling statistic in terms of tonnage of weapons. We'll come back to you later on and see if you still feel as comfortable about that as you do first time off the back of the envelope. This reporting about the Scuds is somewhat puzzling, because here's another one from what under normal circumstances you would regard as a fairly good source. Just reminding you that the Secretary of Defense said that all reports of Scuds, as far as he was concerned, were false. But here is the Ministry of, excuse me for interrupting, the Ministry of Civil Defense in Bahrain, which is a tiny island just off the eastern province of Saudi Arabia, and he also says that Iraqi missiles were detected heading for an area around Bahrain and eastern Saudi Arabia early on Thursday. It is now 4:30 in the morning in eastern Saudi Arabia and Bahrain, but fell short of their targets. We'll just leave it there for the moment, along with a lot of the information, and reinforce what we said at the beginning, that the knowledge of the early stages of the military campaign is very limited, either deliberately or because it is not available. Here is an Israeli diplomatic source, however, who tells ABC News just a short while ago that all the Iraqi Scud missile sites, we can have a look at them on the map again, which are within range of Israel, have been destroyed or put out of action in some form. That all known, and this is quoting the Israelis now, that all known Iraqi atomic and chemical weapon plants have been destroyed. And one of the things that has puzzled analysts early on as to whether or not whatever nuclear capacity the Iraqis had, they could at least move around in some respects, part of the shell game they played. And if we can go to a map of Baghdad, here is another quote from a very senior source in Israel, which says, no, a city map of Baghdad, if we have one, that the Iraqi parliament buildings and the presidential palace in Baghdad had suffered direct hits. Now you can see the new presidential palace, which is down there on right at the bottom of the screen on the left-hand side. That is on the western bank of the Tigris River, and the parliament buildings are in the same general area, though they do not appear on that map. But while we have that map, let me just for a second sketch out this question of civilians and targets to which the Secretary referred. On the western side or left side of that river, Baghdad is reasonably sparsely populated. It is largely government buildings, the Ministry of Information, the headquarters of the Ba'ath Party, which rules Iraq, this new presidential palace, which President Saddam Hussein has met, and then little down there, that white portion, just a little bit to your right there, is the presidential compound, the foreign ministry, and in there stop also the information ministry, all of them really right on the banks of the river. Now, this is a fairly open part of Baghdad. You have to go all the way to the left off your screen there to go out to the ring of anti-aircraft missile defenses and the international airport, which the Air Force would have targeted this evening. On the right-hand side of the river there, downtown Baghdad is extremely densely populated. It's where the old city is, it's where the souk, the main markets are, and where a large percentage of the population are. Now, if you look at it from a satellite, we'll just add one more point for the second. which is that if this attack occurred, as it did, before office hours, those government buildings on the west side, those which were targets, would have not had civilians in them. Again, all in the nature of speculative reporting at this point, but joining us is the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, Les Aspin, who's had a good deal to say about the military campaign. Do you think what we're saying is making any sense, sir?
Yes, I think it is. I think that this plan is going pretty much according to the way it was laid out in our hearings. The object is to take Kuwait. Is being done with phases, beginning with the air war, and particularly the air war against the strategic targets, and then ultimately, if necessary, we go to the ground forces. I think it sounds pretty much the way we expected it.
Give us a sense of timing, if you will, Congressman. There is this tendency at the moment, as we said earlier, to think of it as television games in some respects that people are just talking about on television. But how long is this campaign likely to last?
Well, the way we had heard it, and again, you know, we're waiting to see whether, in fact, they follow the script as we laid out, but that it would take at least a couple of days of the strategic bombing. Then they would go to the bombing, particularly where they focus on the military targets in the Kuwaiti theater of operations. That means within Kuwait itself and the part of Iraq that is neighboring onto Kuwait. And that could take 10 days, 2 weeks. In fact, if it looked like there wasn't enough damage done, it might take longer than that.
Now, you've done as much analysis, I think, as any politician in the country on this subject. Do you think there's any chance that the air war alone will dislodge the Iraqis?
I discounted it. I didn't rule it out, but I discounted it. And, of course, we've had a big debate in this country about whether air war could do it alone. But I think the interesting thing about the plan that the U.S. military has come up with is you don't have to choose. We're going to do them in sequence. So those people that have been saying that air war will do it all by themselves will have a chance to see whether they're right. Because, in fact, if it turns out that the air war can do it, we'll all pop the champagne corks and not have to send in the ground troops.
A couple of points here. The Iraqi Air Force was never regarded as being a very serious threat.
Correct.
To U.S. forces, did not perform very well during the Iraq-Iran war, wouldn't bomb low on targets. But in terms of what you're hearing about the suppression of the anti-aircraft capacity, are you surprised or not?
I'm not too surprised, but I think it's been very, very effective. Let me tell you what I think is happening here. We had heard, and I had heard reports during our investigation of this thing about how what we had was kind of an ace in the hole here, which was an ability to jam their electronics. We had developed fairly sophisticated electronics jamming equipment, mainly, of course, aimed at the Soviet Union over the years. And the Iraqis' electronics systems are nowhere near as sophisticated as the Soviet Union. So there was a number of people in the United States military who thought that our ability to jam their communications was going to be pretty significant, that in fact when the war came, Saddam Hussein would lift up the phone and the phone would be dead. Maybe that's what's going on here. I mean, what we have had is indications that the Iraqi response has been light. Now, you've got to be careful. These are early reports, and as General Powell and Secretary Cheney said, we don't really know yet. But basically, if the early responses are right, namely that the Iraqi response to our attack was in fact pretty light, two things come up. One was surprise. But, you know, how could they have been that surprised? I mean, this was right in the window of when we were going to come. Second was, I think, the question that we want to ask is, was our electronic jamming capability as good as people had advertised it?
Okay, Congressman Aspin, thank you. Yes, please, by all means.
Okay, there's a couple of other things that I think were interesting here that we wanted to know early in this battle, and I think we're beginning to find out. One is the question of whether the Arabs would fight. I mean, that was a fundamental question, and that's why I thought it was terribly important that Dick Cheney listed Saudi Arabia and Kuwait air forces as part of the forces that are taking part in these raids.
Can I stop you there for a second?
Yes, sir.
Because there was really never any speculation that Saudi Arabia and Kuwait wouldn't fly. The real question is whether or not Egyptians and Syrians would fight on the ground.
But I think also there was some question as to whether they would attack up targets in Iraq. as opposed to just targets in Kuwait.
But we don't know that they have.
We don't know. And that's what I'm saying, is that the important question, though, is at least we know that, at least as far as this part of the battle is concerned, is that there's some participation by the Kuwaitis and by the Saudi Arabian Air Forces. We'd heard, in fact, staff here had heard something like 150 Saudi Arabian planes had participated.
The symbolism of which for the multinational is very important.
Absolutely critical here. I mean, the point of all of this is, first of all, it's very important for Americans that know that the participation of the Allies, but it's also important in the region that this not be perceived as totally an American versus Iraq, and that's why the participation of allies, but particularly Arab allies, is important. The second issue.
My apologies.
Okay, the second issue is, of course, the issue of the whole focus on whether they would try and bring Israel in, and that, I think, is a very important thing to follow here. And there's some indication, I guess, that maybe the missiles got knocked out early enough and maybe we're over the hump as far as the threat to bringing Israel in. But that's clearly something that we need to watch further.
Okay, Congressman, thank you very much for joining us. Aside from your normally upscale military analysis, it is important to hear the Congressman remind us again that early reports can be misleading. And to just pick up a little bit on what he said in terms of Saudi Arabian and Kuwaiti participation, the symbolism of which will be enormously important, not only to the multinational alliance, but in the Arab world in general in terms of the political repercussions of this battle. But we do not yet know what role they precisely played. We don't know the role that any U.S., British, French, Saudi Arabian, or Kuwaiti aircraft played at the moment. One of the most astounding reports we have heard so far, I want to go back briefly to Bob Zelnick at the Defense Department just for this one question, is that you had heard, I thought, from Navy sources, Bob Zelnick, that 100 cruise missiles had been launched.
We received that shortly before the briefing. General Powell would not confirm that at the briefing. In fact, he wouldn't mention which planes or weapons had been used. But our information is that there was a massive use of the cruise missiles, which probably accounts in large measure for the degree of tactical surprise because of their ability to avoid radar detection and knock out the very facilities that could detect the other aircraft.
Okay, Bob Zelnick at the Pentagon, thank you very much. And not to, again, to make light of it at all, but Admiral Crow did say a while ago that one of the things the military clearly wants to know is whether or not all of the new technology that has been developed since the Vietnam War works, and the cruise missile, of course, has never been tested in battle. But that is a source report, not an on-the-record report, that 100 cruise missiles were launched. They would have been launched from Navy ships in the Persian Gulf. Let's go back to Oklahoma City for just a moment and listen to Admiral William Crow for just a second on what you think of the briefing that we got, Admiral Crow, from the Secretary and your successor in the chair at the Joint Chiefs.
I thought it was very appropriate, Peter, and I really sympathize with him on these probing questions that are way too premature at this point when we know so little, and also we are trying to guard information that may be important as we go on. Let me just say in passing that I think the military participation from the very outset of this crisis has been absolutely superb, and we're seeing that reflected again this evening, all the way from the leadership right down to the people that are conducting these strikes. And Senator Warner said that the president is going to rely heavily and give the military great freedom. I certainly hope that's true and very much indicated, and everything that they have done over the last few weeks suggests that that's proper and that they can accept that burden.
You've had more than your share of encounters with politicians who wish to meddle in military affairs. Do you take the president at his word?
I think I do. I think that's been characteristic of President Bush from the outset in this administration.
Now, based on what you've heard in the briefing, no Iraqi resistance of any consequence, or I beg your pardon, limited Iraqi response, says the Secretary of Defense. Surprised?
I'm not sure. First of all, I sort of agree with both Secretary Cheney and General Powell on it's a little too early to start putting this picture together. If Mick Trainor's right about the number of sorties, etc., reports from 2,000 sorties are going to take an awful long time to be sorted out, to be collated, etc. Nevertheless, it is true, as he said, that if there were any disasters or any really unexpected developments, they would know about those. They would know about bad news rather than good news. So I find the entire picture encouraging, but it's still awful early. It's like election night. Still a little early for those computers to grind out the results, and we've got a big job ahead of us digging out the whole Iraqi military.
I agree.
No question.
I agree, Admiral Crown, and I can assure you we will not, I hope, make the mistake of projecting any of the results of this campaign based on the military equivalent of exit polls. Let me ask you one other question for the moment. It's a little after 6 o'clock in the morning in Baghdad. The sun is up. In fact, Baghdad radio is back on the air. We aren't hearing much from it except recitations from the Quran, which may well indeed be an indication of the somber mood at best that occurs in the country at the moment. But when first light comes after a major night operation at the moment, how does the military situation change?
The military situation
Yes,
per
sir.
se?
Yes, sir.
Well, first of all, there will be a seriousness about their work today that was not there 24 hours ago. And any doubts, lingering doubts or otherwise, about American seriousness was going to happen, the war was upon us, that's all dispelled. You'll now see the professionalism set in on both sides in a great big way. You will see less enthusiasm, less bravado, and more determination, gritting of teeth, and hunkering down.
So unless, again, I realize this is speculative, but unless the U.S. has had a massively successful first night, everything's going to be tougher on the first day after the first night.
Well, certainly people perform better and they react quicker and they are not surprised and they know more about what it's like from now on. If we have in fact had a very, very massive success today, then we will react accordingly and they will also. A little early to say that, though.
Okay, Admiral Crowell, thanks very much for joining us. Look forward to hearing from you again. I must confess that we have been sitting here with something of a desperate urge to know how the families of men and women serving in the Gulf have been reacting around the country to the news as it has been coming in now for only, believe it or not, a little more than 3 hours since we first heard those early reports of the attack on the western outskirts of Baghdad. We have managed to put together a little reaction from some of the families at Fort Bragg in North Carolina.
I was watching the program, and all of a sudden all this came on, and it just hit me. You know, I'm hurting for my daughter, and my son-in-law is over there, and I'm just taking it hard, because I got a son that he might be leaving too.
We knew it was coming, but that didn't soften the blow.
My sister, you know, which is his niece, she's leaving tomorrow morning. I had to come off and see her one last time. Hopefully I'll see her again. You know, I knew we had to do this. Just, I don't know why, really.
But if at any time you wish to leave us, you leave us. Oh.
Everyone will remember where they were when Operation Desert Shield became Operation Desert Storm. Some turned to God as churches opened their doors tonight, as people flocked in looking for answers and solace. Others were glued to radios or television sets as the news began to sink in. And for some, the news was a grim awakening of just what waits for them as they get ready to ship out.
Yeah, I'm scared. I got family back home in Texas, and I'm ready to go fight and do my job, but I'm scared.
I'm more worried about my troops that's already over there. Those are the ones I'm worried about. They're over there, and I should be there, and I've been doing a lot of work back here, and I think I should be there now with them.
We do not know who the reporter was in North Carolina, but our thanks to our affiliate station WTVD, and we will do our best as the night goes on to knit the country together as best we can electronically by getting response from the various corners of the country, from east to west, from north to south. Back to the State Department, John McCarthy. Jack.
Peter, several things to comment on. First of all, one of the military observations that you have been kicking around throughout the night, the limited response from the Iraqis. The fact that this attack came at night and that the Iraqi Air Force has an extremely difficult time flying at night may account for at least part of the limited response. Also, of course, surprise. And the point that you were making just a few moments ago about what happens when daylight comes up. Remember that the Iraqis are capable, much more capable, of fighting in daylight than they are during the night. And when they can see aircraft coming in, then they can do the sorts of things that they were not able to do during at night. Even small arms fire can bring down American aircraft if they're coming in low and fast. That is one point. Now, here at the State Department, they have just given us some of the details of what has happened during the course of the day. The first country that was notified, called in early this morning, was Prince Bandar of Saudi Arabia. The State Department asked him to please inform his government that the United States was going to go forward. Throughout the afternoon, Secretary Baker and others in the State Department began informing all the different countries that are part of the coalition exactly what time this operation was going to get underway. Secretary Baker was up in his office around 7 p.m. when the actual bombing began. He was watching ABC News and Gary Shepard's report. Then he knew that the world knew what the Bush administration had set into motion. There has been no response from the Iraqi government tonight at all. There was no response prior to this attack. As Secretary Cheney indicated, that was one of the prerequisites, that there were no last-minute feelers coming out from the Iraqis prior to this. The State Department is confirming there were not, and there still has not been.
Okay, John McCarthy at the State Department, thank you very much. I think our audience has heard it more than once now, but it is worth monitoring as closely as we can. We think over the next several days as to whether or not part of Saddam Hussein's strategy was to engage the United States in precisely this fashion. Perhaps he didn't anticipate the degree of power that would be launched against him, though everything we've heard from our military analysts has been that at least his generals are aware of the capabilities, not only of the U.S., but of the other members of the alliance. But there is a game being played by Saddam Hussein which so few of us in this country have been able to understand. It was interesting to hear, interesting and almost irritating to a lot of people in the country at this point, that as of now, Saddam Hussein is not regarded as a target by the U.S. military. This can mean a couple of things. A number of senior serving officers have said to us over the last week or two that if you ever get Saddam Hussein, it'll be by accident. He has, among other things, 37 at last count, residences around the country. He's known never to spend more than 1 or 2 nights in the same place at the same time, though during a military campaign, he will surely have to be, as everybody has pointed out, close to his command and control centers. But the effort by the U.S. Air Force and others tonight, as General Powell said, was to attack at the military offensive capability of Iraq. And as Admiral Crow, and John McCarthy have said, daylight brings something of a different equation. Very briefly, just before we go, because as people have commented around the country, we've tried to gather them, Senator John Glenn, a Democrat of Ohio, a man who has taken a profound interest in American military affairs, has a short while ago made a brief comment to us, and here is something of what he had to say.
As far as the longer term goes, I think long term, once this thing is resolved, what our relationship is with other nations in that area, what kind of force is a peacekeeping force? Will it be UN or will it be mainly Arab neighbors? And for most of that force, will we be required to stay there with a military power for a long time along with our coalition allies? Lots of questions, I think, that have not had much discussion yet, or I haven't seen much discussion on either here in the Congress or from the administration. Those things have to be addressed for the long term.
Portion of the senators remarked. Senator John Glenn, Democrat of Ohio, long interested in military affairs and putting his finger on something that many people in the country will have thought about tonight, which is the long-term ramifications for the U.S., whether the U.S. is not in the Middle East now, in a sense, perpetually going to have to guarantee the defense of Saudi Arabia and Kuwait if Kuwait is finally liberated. Britt Hume at the White House with further news. Britt, on how the decision was actually and finally arrived at.
Peter, the White House has been at some pains tonight to create at least the impression that the decision to do this was actually and officially made today. It seems apparent from the scope of this operation that it is something that had to have been set in motion days, if not weeks ago, and the president or the president's spokesman, Mr. Fitzwater, has indicated that the date of it was set according to military priority, so presumably this date had been picked. Nonetheless, it is said that yesterday the president signed a national security directive, which is the necessary document to bring something like this into being, and it was undated. And that at some point today, the decision was formally and officially made that today would be the day. Obviously, reporters here have been somewhat skeptical as to whether this really wasn't a foregone conclusion and that the decision had not been made. And the question was asked, well, what about all these hopes you kept holding out about how a last-minute diplomatic solution might save the day? And the answer came back from the president's spokesman, well, an announcement of a massive pullout could, up until today, have staved this off, and perhaps indeed that's true. One other thing, Peter, the president has now retired to his residence, where he will be given periodic updates into the night. He has an overnight guest, the Reverend Billy Graham, who is an old friend of the Bushes, and who we're told, as we have in the past, is someone he calls upon for spiritual advice at such times.
Just to solidify this for me, if you will, forgive my ignorance here, but Secretary Cheney said the execute order was signed yesterday. You say it was undated.
That is the order that was given by the president was signed yesterday. Now, these processes that go forward with all of the official documents are at times bewildering, even to those of us who try to deal with them on a day-to-day basis. I suspect that the execute order of which he speaks is the execute order that he had to sign to place the matter formally in General Powell's hands so that he could go on and move it down the chain of command. I think that's how I interpret it, but I could be wrong.
Okay, and like everything else, it'll take time to sort out. There will indeed be people in the country who think the president, having gone so quickly after the deadline, which was imposed by the United Nations under considerable U.S. pressure. The U.S. originally wanted the deadline to be January the 1st, and then it got backed up to the 15th of January. There will be people who think the president was very eager to go soon after the deadline. Whatever the case, we will be back to continue our coverage. It is a little more than 6 hours since this operation began, and about 3 hours and 18 minutes since we first learned that the United States and Iraq were at war. We'll be right back after this and a word from your local stations.
Some cars come and go, but every once in a while, they dance. Introducing the new G20 from Infiniti. A mid-sized luxury sedan that offers lots of room, all the amenities, and a nimble spirit that's every inch an Infiniti. Care to dance?
Critics rave over Hamlet. Emotionally charged, beautifully cinematic, Mel Gibson's Hamlet is strong and intelligent. Gibson is terrific, incredible. Glenn Close is near perfection. Go see it. Mel Gibson, Glenn Close, Hamlet. Rated PG, now playing at select theaters everywhere, January 18th.
To celebrate 30 years of 30-minute delivery, Domino's Pizza delivers the Big 3-0. Order a large pizza at regular price and get a medium with your favorite topping for just 30 cents more. A great deal like this won't last forever, so call now and ask for the Big 3-0. The Big 3-0. It's time for Domino's Pizza Big 3-0.
This is an Action News special report. War with Iraq.
We've all been watching Peter Jennings and the ABC news organization trying to tell us what it can about the hostilities that have broken out in the Persian Gulf tonight. We are now 3 hours and 20 minutes into these hostilities. Of course, Action News is trying its best to assemble information so that you can get a perspective from our point of view here in the tri-state area about what's going on. Let's go live to New Jersey correspondent Nora Mushanek, who is at the McGuire Air Force Base in New Jersey. Nora, you've been able to sample some reaction there.
Jim, the mood here is very tense tonight. We cannot confirm that this base is on full alert at this point, but we can only assume that's the case since the war has begun. No one is being allowed on base without a full ID, and the place is literally swarming with military police and New Jersey State Police. In fact, we've been stopped several times this evening by both of those organizations. Now, we were in a bar earlier this evening near Fort Dix when word of the war came down, and I can tell you that the reaction there was tears and cheers at the same time. There were tears from some wives who have husbands in Saudi Arabia at this moment, and also some cheers from the servicemen who are tired of all the waiting and want to go in and get this operation done and finished with.
All right, thank you, Nora, very much. And of course, we'll have more from you on Action News at 11 o'clock tonight, including video and pictures and some of those interviews that you have referred to. The outbreak of war tonight had some impact in Philadelphia, where Senator John Hines was in Center City conducting a previously scheduled town hall meeting. And interestingly, Hines was the one who informed the people in attendance tonight that war had broken out in the Persian Gulf. And he said quite quickly and decisively that he had to take off because he had to go back to Washington at a moment's notice. One protester tried to block his way and give him one final message before he left, but John Hines was back to Washington. Of course, we'll have a complete report from the local point of view on Action News at 11. I'm Jim Gardner.
I'm Peter Jennings at ABC's headquarters in New York. Probably not possible that you do not know the news now, but about 6 hours ago, the United States, Great Britain, France, and the Air Force participation of Saudi Arabia and the government of Kuwait in exile launched a massive attack against Iraqi forces in Kuwait and Baghdad. We've already had one briefing from the Secretary of Defense and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs who give a pretty clear indication that the operation is going fairly well as expected, which is very encouraging in military terms. President Bush has spoken to the nation. Perhaps you were with us. He says the battle has been joined. What was called Operation Desert Shield for so long is now called Operation Desert Storm. There appears to have been limited military reaction or resistance from the Iraqis on the ground at the moment. The operation began at night. It is now 6:30 in the morning in Baghdad, and as the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Admiral William Crowe, told us a short while ago, this may change the equation of the battle. ABC's John McCarthy, our national security correspondent, points out that the Iraqis have a limited nighttime fighting capability, but a somewhat better daytime capability. Let us now begin to talk a little bit about the political repercussions this is having in an already volatile, always tense region of the world, namely the Middle East itself. ABC's Don Kladstrup is in Cairo. The Egyptians are part of the multinational force. They have ground forces there. There's no indication that anybody has moved on the ground as of yet. It is 5:30 in the morning in Cairo, Don, so I suspect your knowledge of how the Egyptians are faring is somewhat limited.
That's right, but judging by the reaction over the past several days, I think there's probably enormous relief here that the inevitable is finally underway. There is also, however, quite a bit of concern about what will happen if Egyptian troops are asked to go into Kuwait to actually help liberate things there. There's a lot of fear there and a lot of doubt about it.
As you wander around the streets of that enormous, teeming, crowded, politically opinionated city, what are people saying about actually doing battle with fellow Arabs like this?
It's a concern that is in the back of their mind. Most Egyptians are firmly behind the offensive to liberate Kuwait. The fear here, however, is that if it becomes a protracted offensive, if it carries on for several days, for instance, or several weeks, the idea of Arab versus Arab could become a factor and could weaken support for the offensive.
Forgive me if I'm a little cynical here, but I'm a little surprised at the Egyptians being particularly determined to liberate Kuwait, perhaps more determined to please the United States?
Perhaps, I think. This is a standard government line that the idea we will free Kuwait, but and they are constantly coming out with words that our forces are firmly committed to the offensive, but they are not saying how far they will be willing to go.
Now, when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait and the U.S. began its enormous military buildup, there was the most massive stream of Egyptian refugees who left Kuwait and Iraq and came home to Egypt. Do Egyptians now anticipate another wave if they can get out?
That's right, but there is, I think, even greater fear for the number of Egyptians that are still in Iraq and in Kuwait, several 100,000 at least.
Well, we lose the satellite to Cairo there. Don Kladstrup standing by. We don't lose the satellite in every instance because something has gone wrong. Sometimes we book a block of time, and when we've used up the time and haven't paid for any more, the international authorities simply take it away. But just a little to pick up on the Kladstrup point there. There are, in fact, 900,000 Egyptians still living in Iraq. It has always been a place where Egyptians have gone for employment. They went to Kuwait as well because they went in pursuit of the money to build a country that became richer faster than any other in the Persian Gulf. And there has been enormous concern in Egypt for some long period of time that what might happen if a ground war begins is that Egyptians would actually be fighting other Egyptians, because not only are there 900,000 Egyptian civilians working in Iraq, but there are many members, some estimates as high as 50,000, actually in the Iraqi army. So there is an indication of just how complicated things become in the Middle East. It is early days, perhaps, to be talking about the long-term consequences of the beginning of war in the Middle East, but as you well know, it has been very much part of the run-up debate to the war. Tonight, we've speculated a couple times from our somewhat isolated position here that all of the country will be concerned about American servicemen and women in the Middle East, but it has not derailed the anti-war opposition which exists in considerable measure around the country. Here, for example, is a brief example of the anti-war sentiment of today from California. Let me quickly say that is not an example of anti-war sentiment in California. But this is another scene. Let's just continue to roll it for a second, because this is a scene being played out also in many parts of the country of men and women of the reserve waiting to go abroad to the Gulf.
I'm not sure if we're going anywhere, but if we do, I'll be ready for you.
You have four children in the Persian Gulf.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Your concerns right now, as you see the fact that obviously war has begun and we have attacked Iraq. How do you feel about that?
Scared to death. Absolutely. I was hoping, you know, that maybe some peace would come out of this, maybe within another few days, but this guy's got to be taken care of. There's no doubt about it.
I'm sick about it.
May never have intended that.
So I just feel like crying, really. I hate to see all the devastation that's going to come about.
I think we've, given 6 months to let the economic sanctions take effect, and he didn't seem to respond, and we tried everything we could, and I support the president and what he's doing.
It's too bad, but I still have to think we had to do something. If we don't get him now, we're going to have to go back in later. As far as I'm concerned, they need to go in and blast him off.
The voices of Americans in various parts of the country. Doesn't perhaps matter precisely where they are geographically at the moment, but the voices of those Americans who, in considerable measure throughout the country, have expressed this deeply felt belief by many people that if Saddam Hussein was not dealt with now, he would have to be dealt with as a much stronger individual in the future. What war in the Middle East does is totally destabilize the situation for the immediately foreseeable future. Now, I'm not sure if we're able to see the other piece of video which we had intended to introduce to you, but there has been anti-war sentiment in the country tonight. About 100 people were arrested in Los Angeles as they tried to block entrance to the federal building there. And in New York City, in New York's Times Square, an Army recruiting station was splattered with red paint and peace signs. It would, however, probably be wrong to characterize the anti-war movement as people who just rush around, though some people do, and paint signs and throw paints on Army recruiting stations. If you judge the nation's temperature in part by the opposition in the churches throughout the country, there is very vigorous operation from churches throughout the country in almost every part of the country and from every denomination in the country. You've probably seen it on television or read it in your local newspapers over the run-up to the beginning of Operation Desert Storm. Sheila Cast is standing by now with a guest. Sheila?
We've heard some of that anti-war.
Sheila Cast. I'm not even quite sure where she is. In Washington? Sheila Cast is on Capitol Hill. She's with Congressman Ron Dellums from California. Should we have another try? Okay, can we go to the Middle East? Like very much if we could to talk to Jordan. or maybe to Sirius, John Donovan, who is ABC's correspondent in Jordan. Just as we do that, could we please again take a look at the map so that we remind people of the situation in Jordan, at least geographically. Jordan sits, I think we need a high shot here. Jordan sits between Iraq and Israel. Right up there on the upper left-hand corner of your screen, that's the Mediterranean Ocean. Go in one square, and that is Jordan, squeezed in between Syria and Iraq. King Hussein, as I think everybody in the country knows, has tried very hard for the last 5.5 months to get an Arab political settlement to all this. He's been virtually cut off at the knees by some people, particularly the Saudi Arabians. Many Saudis are convinced that he knew that Saddam Hussein was going to invade Kuwait, though he and every other member of the royal family has denied it. The Saudis cut off his oil. His country is suffering, has a very strong Palestinian population, very pro-Saddam Hussein. Therefore, early this morning in Amman, the capital, John Donovan, what's the reaction?
So far, not very much, Peter, because as you've said, it is early in the morning. I don't think very many people in the country know what has happened. I'd say they're probably about an hour away from waking up and turning on their radios. Jordan Radio has broadcast the news, but only with the sketchiest details, telling its audience that there has been an attack on Iraq and telling them that they should tune in much later in the day for fuller reports. Some people, interestingly enough, are following events here from Israel television, whose broadcast signal spills over into Jordan. Some of those people I've spoken with, and the impression I get, despite all of the opposition that we've heard from Jordanians and Palestinians through these last several months, is that in a way there's a kind of sense of relief. At least the tension has broken, and the great concern that people had here that Israel would be drawn into the war, and then following that Jordan, because it so far has not played out as a scenario, I think that fact alone is giving people some sense of relief. The Jordan Times, an English-language newspaper here at this moment, is making over its front page to report the news. That newspaper's editor told me this morning that he considers the military attacks quite effective from all of the information he has, but he also says he would like very much to hear from the Iraqi side, and he is unwilling to be drawn on final conclusions until he can hear from the Iraqis. He realizes that due to communication problems, that could be some time.
John, a couple of points, John. Let me stop you there for a second on this sort of business of communication. He'd like to hear from the Iraqis. In the last days before this war broke out, Saddam Hussein, I gather, refused to take phone calls from anybody, including King Hussein, because he was fed up with people trying to talk him out of this. Is that right?
We've heard the same information, and our impression also is that in the last day or so, the king probably gave up trying to get through to Saddam. His tone in a speech, the king's tone in a speech to the nation 2 nights ago, was more or less one of resignation. It sounded as though the king were simply saying to the nation, we are probably facing a war, and let us not lose our heads when that happens. This is a tense country at all times. I would say that these last few days in particular have civil unrest has been threatened as a result of the assassination of the number 2 man in the PLO. He is due to be buried here in the next day or two. As a result of that, Palestinian refugee camps, we understand, were already under very tight control. There were going to be extra security people put into those camps in any case. I'm sure now, given this situation, those camps are going to be looked at as possible locales of serious unrest, but the Jordanians seem determined to control that as much as possible.
Let me stop you for a second. John, let me stop you for just a second. Can I ask you a question about refugees? The point, by the way, first of all, being that Jordan has incredibly effective internal security. If they want to close down the Palestinian refugee camps, there's no question they can. What about refugees in general, John? Now that war is breaking out, is Jordan prepared to handle an outpouring of refugees from Iraq?
Financially, they are certainly not able to handle it. They were very badly strapped back in August when the first wave of thousands and thousands of people came across the border. Jordan spent something close to $50 million on that they just didn't really have to spend. They were hoping for more support from the outside world and never had it. As a result, a few days ago, when it appeared again that there was going to be a new wave, they closed their borders and told people, basically, unless you can prove when you reach our border crossing that you have the money to get right out of Jordan, you cannot come across. Some nations, like Egypt, have set up their own facilities near the border, which guarantee that any Egyptian that comes across will quickly be transported home. So Egyptians are fine, but it's people like Sri Lankans, Filipinos, Indians, Pakistanis who are there in the tens of thousands as laborers who are going to be stuck. And we have heard reports that several thousand of them might have been stuck on the Iraqi side of the border over the last few days. We cannot confirm that. But at the moment, the Jordanians are very concerned about being flooded with refugees, and I don't think they will open the gates to them, at least not for the next several days.
John, in the last 5.5 months, we have seen more fervent pro-Saddam Hussein sentiment from Palestinians in Jordan than anywhere else. And it is quite possible the Jordanians are going to get out of bed just about now and find out that he has suffered a tremendous blow. Now, you used to live in Amman, you've served there a lot recently. How do you think they're going to react?
My sense is that Jordanians are probably going to cope with this, that they are going to absorb it. Jordanians I've spoken with already, who I must say are people who are at the educated level of society and therefore somewhat more moderate in their behavior and words, are already saying, well, at least it's over, and now we'll see what happens. However, people with probably less at stake in life, primarily Palestinians in refugee camps who are living in such terrible conditions, are very likely to be angry and very likely at least to want to go out and demonstrate. I'm not so sure the Jordanian security forces are going to want to allow that. The sense here is that there will be some level of civil disturbance, but that it can be controlled and probably is not a threat at all to the regime. And the question of whether American targets here could be hit by mobs has come up. It's in everyone's mind, but the general impression is probably that is controllable. We did notice tonight, it was well past midnight here when the attack began, that the lights went on in the U.S. Embassy, and that embassy staff arrived very quickly after the attack began, many of them carrying what appeared to be overnight bags, without, however, giving the impression that they were planning to leave the country, but more that they were preparing to hunker down in case it would prove necessary inside the embassy.
Thank you, John.
We have had contact with people there. They seem quite calm and are telling us absolutely, categorically, they are not planning to evacuate. They are also indicating they seem to feel that the situation is at the moment in control and controllable, although all of us are waiting to see what happens in an hour when the sun comes up and people turn on their radios and get the news.
Thank you, John. Past experiences, any example, including during Black September in 1970 when the King and the Palestinians fought a vicious civil war. People in the American embassy then were always well protected by the Jordanian establishment, namely the Jordanian army and the Mukhabarat, the Jordanian secret service. It may also be, you still with us, John Donovan?
Yes, I am.
It may also be that given the political support the Palestinians have given King Hussein as well as Saddam Hussein, that the king will be obliged to tolerate, if not encourage, but certainly tolerate a measure of political, you call it disturbance, but outpouring of support for Saddam Hussein today.
I would think it depends on what form it takes. I'm certain that the king will allow peaceful demonstrations. He has for the last several months. We saw another one just a few days ago. They have been very moderate. The language, the rhetoric has been quite fierce, but the actual physical manifestation has been quite moderate. People marching peacefully, usually to a stadium, and then making speeches there. I would imagine that if that's what people have in mind, the king will almost certainly allow that. But I don't think he in any way will tolerate even a threatening move by a crowd towards the U.S. Embassy.
Okay.
That has been attempted in vague form over the last 10 months when various issues have angered Palestinians about U.S. policy, and always the king puts troops between the demonstrators and the U.S. Embassy.
Do I assume, John, you're in
that he wouldn't want to change policy.
Do I assume, John, you're in the Intercontinental Hotel?
Yes, about 100 yards away from the embassy.
That's exactly. You're right across the road from it. So if anything happens to the American Embassy in Amman, John Donovan will be the first to tell us about it. Just a couple of other points about Jordan, which are not particularly relevant to the moment, but there has been an enormously high state of alert on the Jordanian-Israeli border, with the largest deployment of Jordanian forces in many years down there. But if the early stages of the reporting are accurate from, and I'm sure, don't doubt them, from Dean Reynolds quoting Israeli military intelligence, that the Iraqi missiles, which had the capability of attacking, being launched at Israel from Iraq 250, 260 miles away, then the general tension or the general temperature, the political and military temperature in the Jordan Valley, which Israel and Jordan share and dispute, will likely go down. There are those in Jordan and elsewhere in the Arab world and here at home who say that Saddam Hussein does not have to win a war to become a hero. Not necessarily does he even have to win a war to remain preeminent in the Arab world if he is not personally destroyed or his immediate political apparatus is not destroyed. Joining us again is our regular Middle East analyst, Judith Kipper. What do you think about that?
I think that's right, Peter. I think that there is a chance that if he stays alive during this war and there is frustration and rage in the Arab street, that he really could be a hero afterwards. But I'm impressed that in the early hours of this war that Baghdad was hit. That's certainly going to have a huge psychological impact, not only on Saddam Hussein, but on the Iraqi people. And if the reports are correct, the chance for Saddam Hussein to hit Israel and draw Israel into this war have already been eliminated.
Or at least minimized.
Minimized. If that's true, I think that that already limits his capacities and may catch him off balance, and we might see some things that otherwise would be unexpected.
Okay, Judith, please stay with us, but I want to cut away from you for a moment because standing by in Louisville, Kentucky, is Congressman Lee Hamilton, the Democrat who is the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. It is about 20 minutes to 11. By the way, at 11 o'clock, we shall cut away for local news all around the country, though we will continue to provide the same continuous international coverage from here. Congressman Hamilton, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you for joining us, sir. Your thoughts this evening?
Well, I've been very encouraged by the initial reports of the military action. I find among my constituents, and I'm sure among most Americans, an almost desperate hope that this military action will be quick and decisive. And we all fervently hope that that's the case. The reports indicate it might be.
Do you know anything that we don't, sir? Have you been briefed in any particular way that we have not?
No. I've been here in my constituency in Indiana, and will be returning very soon to Washington.
I thought it was puzzling that somebody told me you were in Louisville, Kentucky. I'm glad you tell me precisely where you are. When did you last talk to the President?
Over a week ago, when he had one of his briefings for members of Congress. And at that time, I think, like others, I was deeply impressed by the frustration the President felt about these events in the Gulf area and his impatience. And therefore, it was not the least bit surprising to me that he chose to strike very shortly after that January 15th date.
Tell me how you were impressed with his impatience.
More the manner of the man, I guess, than actual words. A kind of unwillingness to entertain thoughts that challenge the idea of striking early. His language slipped into colloquialisms. He felt as if he had been, well, some of them have been very well stated in the media. And you felt as if he'd really made up his mind. He had heard all of the arguments from everybody, and it was time to get on with it.
Britt Hume was saying to us at the White House just a few minutes ago that the word from the White House tonight is that the decision was made today. Do I hear you saying that you think he made the decision to go as soon as the deadline expired a couple of weeks ago?
My belief is he made the decision to use military force some time ago. I'm sure the exact timing of it depended on factors like advice from his military commanders, but I had no doubt in my mind that within a matter of hours after that January 15th date, he was prepared to go.
Are you, what's the word, not pleased, but are you satisfied that the United States is presently in a war?
Well, I'm not happy that we're in a war, and I took the view that there were other ways of dealing with this situation, but that debate is behind us now, and it's necessary, I think, for the Congress, for all of the Congress, for the American people to support the President's action, stand behind the troops, and let's see if we can win this war quickly and decisively, and then go on to the problems that are surely going to exist in the Middle East. No matter how this war comes out, we're going to be faced with formidable challenges.
As you correctly point out, Congressman, there's a natural cohesion in the country tonight, supporting the President and supporting the men and women in the Gulf. But how long do you think he has before you begin to debate it in other terms?
I think what the President has is an authority to go to war, provided he wins that war rather quickly. It cannot be unnoticed that a large number in the Congress voted against military action in both the House and the Senate. And it's a little unusual, I think, historically for the United States to go into a war with that many votes in the Congress against it. If this war were to stretch out for a long period of time, then there would be some real political difficulties in sustaining the political support. This will all come to a head in the Congress, I think, when the requests come in for money, for appropriations to support it. Initially, of course, the support of the Congress will be very strong.
Thank you very much, Congressman Hamilton. In his home constituency of Indiana tonight, Democrat, chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. If my memory serves me correctly, the majority in the Senate for the president was 5, and the majority in the House of Representatives, I think, was only about 65 when the Congress gave the president the authorization or the virtual declaration of war. We will be back to continue our coverage of Operation Desert Storm, as the president calls it, in just a moment.
Unfortunately, the Wagner's new vacuum cleaner was not the most trouble-free in its class. Neither was the new refrigerator, nor the new lawnmower they got such a good deal on. Thank goodness they made one new purchase that was the most trouble-free in its class 2 years running, the Toyota Corolla.
Maybe you ought to just let that lawn die out.
I know what you do for me, Toyota.
Don't you wish you'd bought the video cassette of Lady and the Tramp when you had the chance? Now it's gone, and time is running out to add Cinderella to your collection. But you still have a chance to own 2 of Disney's most delightful animated classics, The Magical Peter Pan and the Academy Award-winning The Little Mermaid. Still available, but only for a limited time. Don't let Peter Pan and The Little Mermaid get away.
If this is a cold, this is the flu. Cold. Flu. Cold. Flu. If what you've got is more than a simple cold, now there's Metaflu, with a maximum dosage of 4 strong medicines to give you flu-strength relief for even your worst symptoms. New Metaflu from Parke-Davis. For more than a cold. For the flu. Metaflu.
When this was Grandfather's desk, every week Grandma'd polish it with Pledge for a beautiful shine with no buildup. Now that it's mine, I use Touchable Pledge.
With Pledge, smears just disappear.
Grandma's gonna love it.
Also in a trigger spray bottle.
It's Red Lobster's new lunch menu.
Right now, featuring our lunch shrimp combo.
Just $3.99.
Tempting scampi and fried shrimp.
Plus potato and salad for a limited time.
Just $3.99.
At Red Lobster for lunch.
ABC News coverage of the Gulf War continues. Once again, reporting from ABC's World Headquarters in New York, Peter Jennings.
Again, though we think it not possible that you don't know, like we know, the bare bones of what is going on in the Middle East tonight, it is about almost 5 hours now since the United States, France, Great Britain, and with Air Force participation from Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, launched an attack against Iraqi forces in Kuwait and Iraq. The early characterization of this first night of apparently a massive array of American firepower from the air, from the Secretary of Defense and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, is that it is going about as well as expected. There appears to have been reasonably limited, in some cases almost non-existent resistance from the Iraqis, and there is a real suggestion that using at least 2 weapons, American cruise missiles fired from battleships in the Persian Gulf and the stealth bomber, that the American Air Force and Navy have accomplished a measure of surprise that has pleased the U.S. military immensely. Let us go to eastern Saudi Arabia, where ABC's Bill Redeker is standing by. Bill, you've had so far a very dicey night there. Start talking, I guess.
Yeah, it's been interrupted by a couple of air raids. Fortunately, nothing came into our area of northeastern Saudi Arabia. Everybody's been let out of the hotel. You might find it interesting, Peter, to note what the Saudis here and the Kuwaiti refugees, of which there are a couple of 100,000, are seen on television this morning. We have some videotape of that we'd like to show you. This is called The Songs of War. It is a video that is played during times of war in this country. It is meant to stir up the local populace. We are told by our Saudi friends and contacts here that this is almost the equivalent of at least recognizing, perhaps even celebrating, the U.S. attack earlier today, your time, or last night, our time. We can now show you what's on television live as we're seeing it. This is a video we're told is called The Crime of the Century, and it's about what happened to Kuwait, the invasion of Kuwait on August 2nd. It's produced by the Saudis and the Kuwaitis, and of course those are the women who protested during the occupation and some of the graffiti that is written against Iraq. Now, just about a half an hour ago, more air activity here. Another 16 American warplanes took off from the airfield nearby, and we also noticed that a couple of Saudi tornadoes roared out of here also to support that effort.
You mean the British aircraft tornado?
Well, the Saudis have the tornadoes, and so do the British. There are 4 countries represented, and they are the 4 that are involved in this air campaign: the U.S., the Saudis, the British, and the Kuwaitis. All of those planes are represented at this particular airfield.
Do you have any sense of what the Kuwaitis and the Saudis actually did on this mission at all?
Well, I suspect it's more symbolic than anything else. The planes that the Kuwaitis fly are Hawks, and they're not terribly effective. They're somewhat effective, but not nearly as effective as American F-15s. The Saudis also fly American F-15s, but they perhaps were used in a defensive role more than anything else.
How have people been reacting on the ground to what's been going on over the last 4 or 5 hours?
Well, the sirens stirred up things quite a bit here, and you can understand that. But we have talked to Saudis who are in our vicinity, and they seem genuinely pleased. There's been a strong will here for some time to go to war, to wipe out, as they see it, the threat to the kingdom.
And you yourselves have been sent to the shelters a few times?
Twice during the past several hours, air raid warnings went off. We were told by the Marines that a Scud missile alert was in effect. Everybody was